Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining us this week in America. Our website, thisweekinamerica.us. As mentioned, our guest on the program today is Dr. Graham Campbell-Dunn. He's author of the book Minoan Signs and African Decipherment, and he's joining us on This Week in America via Skype from New Zealand. Dr. Campbell-Dunn, welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us today.
It's great to be here.
A fascinating book, and you've done so much over your lifetime that I really would like to talk about here, and some of the work that you've done and what you've gone through with this literally painstaking research and what it means. And you say in the beginning of the book, the foundation for the book was laid years ago in Canterbury as you were teaching the classics. Let's talk about that fascination and where this interest came, that you decided this was really something I'm going to devote some time and look into.
Well, I discovered when I was a student that there were various curious things in Homer that weren't explained, and one of them was Wanax, meaning a sacred king, and it occurred to me then that Wanax might be connected with Bwana, the Swahili word for master. And that was just a thought at the time. But when I went to Wellington, I began to teach Minoan art, and so many problems arose out of Minoan art that I can scarcely describe them. The colours of Minoan art were red, white and black primarily, which I now know are the African colours. But at the time, I referred to the colours as the colours of the British flag because they're black and they're blue, thought of as very much the same. But the Minoans turned out to be a very unusual people. The woman wore a very long skirt and were bare-breasted and frequently held snakes. And the men wore the codpiece, which is an African garment and quite unusual to a modern person. And then, of course, there was the bull. The bull sports were very prominent, and the famous Minotaur arose in Greek mythology, but nobody seemed to know what the Minotaur really was, and nobody still knows what the Minotaur really is.
Well, you've said that you were fascinated by their art, the vitality of their art, and the vitality of the people, but you were frustrated by the ignorance of its origin. Is that what drove you, the fact that in your mind there were pieces of the puzzle missing? It just didn't quite compute. There were questions there that really lingered, and you really wanted to answer those.
There were always pieces missing in the puzzle, but after I retired, I got an insight into the language, and I had always assumed that the Minoan language was beyond decipherment. That was what people generally said. They said there wasn't enough of it to decipher, that they said that you couldn't decipher it without a bilingual and various things like that. And then I discovered in retirement that the Minoan signs were could be identified by comparing Egyptian signs, but the phonetics of the Minoan signs were totally different from Egyptian. So there was another problem there. The next development in this saga was the discovery that Marcel Griot had done work in Africa and had found sign systems, and that these sign systems were quite similar to Minoan signs. And I looked into this and discovered that a book by Dietrich Westermann on Proto-West Sudanic languages, that is, Western languages related to Bantu, that the words he set up were in Linear A, and that as far as the signs could be identified, the words actually referred to the objects represented by the signs. So I decided then and there that I had the answer, but it has taken a lot more work to prove it.
You know, it's interesting, and I want to talk about that path because this is really, I use the word painstaking. I mean, this research has taken a long time for you to assemble, for you to put together, for you to put the missing pieces together in the puzzle. Let's talk about the culture we're dealing with here. How old is this? How many years back do we go with the culture and the language?
Well, we go back at least, I think, 5,000 years. The period we are looking at is about 1600 BC, which is almost 4,000 years ago, but the language and culture must be older than that. And the excavators on Crete found a culture that began developing about 3000 BC with early Minoan following the system used by Evans, and Middle Minoan begins after 2000 BC, and this is the period we're dealing with. 1600 comes within the Middle Minoan period. But all these things go back further than the actual evidence, I feel, and current thinking about Niger-Congo languages is that you can project them back to about 8000 BC.
The book is
And
called.
of course,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
and of course, there is the problem of the relationship between Niger-Congo and Nilo-Saharan. And it is now thought that Niger-Congo developed out of Nilo-Saharan, which is much older than Niger-Congo. But the picture is not straightforward, and we have the Semitic languages, for instance, which fit in somewhere, and the somewhere is far from clear, but there have been suggestions that the Semitic languages too came out of Africa, and there are some clear connections between Semitic and Niger-Congo. In other words, prefixes and suffixes on the word. And prefixes and suffixes appear to have been a feature of early Niger-Congo.
The book is Minoan Signs and African Decipherment. Our guest on the program is G.J.K. Campbell-Dunn. The book is available at Amazon. Information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. I want to talk about the research because we've established that we're talking thousands of years ago. How difficult was it, and were there times when you thought, I'm at an end here, I'm not going to be able to find any more information? This is not like going to the library and readily getting information. How did you go about the research?
Well, I obtained books from overseas because most of the books were not in New Zealand, and I was fortunate that one of the early books I obtained was by Westermann. He does not deal specifically with Niger-Congo, but with what he calls West Sudanic, which is a little wider than Niger-Congo. And I then looked at other books. I looked at the work of his student Mukarovsky, which has a more modern account of a similar proto-language. And Mukarovsky has a larger set of sounds than Westermann. Westermann tends to concentrate on a relatively small number of sounds and uses an archaic system of recording them. Mukarovsky is more modern, about 1970, but Mukarovsky's work agrees pretty well with the work of people who have studied particular branches of Niger-Congo. The reconstructions of different branches of Niger-Congo are pretty similar to Mukarovsky's reconstruction. So Mukarovsky is a pretty good basis for this sort of work. But I did start with Westermann, and to me, Westermann is the master in this subject.
Were there points when you thought this is a dead end and I'm really not going to be able to have a conclusion here?
No. The interesting thing about this research is that by following up thin threads of evidence, I always discovered more evidence in support of my hypothesis. In other words, it has been a continual development in favour of the argument. So I've been quite lucky in this respect. I mean, a lot of research is very negative, and you go up blind alleys and you get nowhere and you start again and so on. But this has not been the case with this research. It has continually moved forward. And relatively recently, I have discovered some French books by RF, who is an independent scholar who writes in French, and he has come to relatively similar conclusions, but he doesn't get into the African connection. He connects the Mycenaeans with the Pelasgians, and also with the Etruscans and Basques, which is what I do, but he doesn't carry it back to Africa. In fact, I think general resistance to an African solution to this problem. And perhaps one could say even that the objections are racist, but I'm not quite sure. I think perhaps it is just the heavy weight of orthodoxy hanging over everybody's shoulders.
What you've done here in the book, again, is Minoan Signs and African Decipherment, is very meaningful. It's very significant. People have said this is an unknown language that now is not an unknown language. Talk in your mind about what you feel your accomplishment means, the significance. I mean, if you were teaching now, you could go into that class and you could really give them a lot more information than you could 20 years ago. Talk about the significance, why this is so important.
Well, it is important because it projects the classics back into Africa, but that has wider implications. If you project the classics back into Africa, you are forced to project the Indo-European languages back into Africa. And I have good evidence that the Indo-European languages are basically African. So they must have come out of Africa at a very early stage. And of course, if you do this, Indo-European civilization is ultimately African in origin, which is not what one would think, and is not what a lot of modern genetics indicates. So there is again a new problem. Each investigation throws up new problems. So we are on a course to look into more and more information. At present, I am looking into the origin of laryngeals, which are a rather peculiar problem of Indo-European linguistics, a type of sound which can be inferred and to some extent actually evidenced, but mainly inferred. And of course, if one can demonstrate the laryngeals, one can start investigating the relationship of a great range of languages.
You've said that it also shed light on religion and culture of prehistoric Greece. So as you're looking into this, the hypothesis you have in the beginning, it actually opened other doors, didn't it? It makes some things maybe even more clear.
Well, both Etruria and early Greece have indications of an early culture that stressed snakes, bulls, and things like that, and which also has indications of feminine dominance. And feminine dominance is something that has been suppressed. But if you go back far enough, you find it definitely exists in these countries. And of course, in Africa at one time, women were very dominant. Perhaps one of the best examples in Greek culture is the Amazons, the female warriors. These female warriors seem to have come from Dahomey in Africa, where they are still known as Amazons.
The book is fascinating. We're out of time, unfortunately, on the program. The book is available at Amazon.com. Information you can gather at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. The book is Minoan Signs and African Decipherment. Our guest on the program has been G.J.K. Campbell-Dunn. The book is excellent, really has opened up a lot of areas, questions that people have had over the years. And you answered the question a few minutes ago. After all the work that you've done and coming up with something that's so significant, I thought maybe you would just settle back and watch some television and relax, and what you find other problems and questions you have, and you're continuing the research.
Yes. The research, as far as I'm concerned, is just at the beginning.
Well, we hope to have you back in the program and talk more about what your research is finding. Again, the book is Minoan Signs and African Decipherment, available at Amazon. Of course, information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Graham, thank you so much for joining us on the program. We appreciate it. Fascinating. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're listening to This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us.